There's a kind of calm that brings relief not by fixing others, but by finally understanding yourself. It's often misunderstood as disengagement, when it's actually a form of quiet control. Psychologically, this calm comes from a mind that processes stimulation more deliberately. And once you recognize that pattern, many interactions stop feeling so personal or confusing. If you want more clarity like this, subscribe and let's ease into the explanation. Psychology suggests that calm is often more destabilizing to toxic people than anger ever could. You're taught that power comes from asserting yourself loudly, but toxic behavior feeds on reaction, not strength. When you stay calm, you remove the emotional leverage they depend on to steer the interaction. This isn't numbness or checking out. It's a regulated internal state where your nervous system stays online instead of being hijacked. Without your emotional response, their usual tactics lose traction. The dynamic quietly shifts, and something subtle happens. But that shift only works if your body knows how to stay there under pressure. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens, your shoulders rise, and before you speak, your body has already chosen a side. So how do you interrupt that? Stress doesn't begin in your thoughts. It begins in your physiology. That's why a repeatable physical sequence matters more than willpower. Slow breathing, dropped shoulders, and a steady exhale signal safety back to your nervous system. An anchor phrase keeps your response intentional instead of reactive. Over time, your body learns that this pattern means pause. And once pause becomes automatic, your mind gains the space to reinterpret what's actually happening. What if the most exhausting part of toxic behavior isn't what they say, but the meaning you automatically attach to it? Provocation works because your brain rushes to personalize it, filling in stories of disrespect, threat, or shame. That instant interpretation fuels escalation. When you relabel the behavior as an attempt to provoke rather than an attack, the emotional temperature drops. Observation replaces participation. You're no longer inside the drama, you're watching it. That distance turns heat into information. And once the story loosens its grip, the way you speak in response starts to change too. Explaining yourself feels mature, but with toxic people, it often hands them more control. Long defenses give them material to twist, debate, or escalate. Short, neutral statements do the opposite. They establish boundaries without feeding the narrative. When you state a limit calmly and without justification, the interaction loses momentum. Neutrality removes the stage they need to perform. Each brief boundary acts as a reset, not a confrontation. And when words stop doing the heavy lifting, something unexpected becomes powerful in its place. What you don't say. There's a kind of relief that comes when you realize silence can do work for you. Toxic dynamics often depend on predictable confrontation, on you filling every gap with explanation or defense. When you don't, a cognitive vacuum forms. Patterns surface without effort. Silence signals that you're filtering, not freezing. It denies the instant feedback they're used to steering by. In that quiet space, behavior reveals itself more clearly than arguments ever could. And once you see that, you start to notice how much control returns, simply by choosing where your energy goes next. Why do you think of the perfect response hours later, but freeze or overshare in the moment? Provocation scrambles your nervous system, not your intelligence. When that happens, your brain defaults to improvisation, and improvisation leaks emotion. Rehearsed scripts remove that burden. Short, factual lines train your mouth and body to stay steady under pressure. Repetition builds familiarity, and familiarity builds calm. You're no longer searching for words. You're executing a pattern. That automation quietly protects your composure. And once your responses stop changing, your attention becomes the next thing worth guarding. Psychologically, attention is the real currency toxic people are trying to steal. Escalation works by creating urgency, pulling your focus off what matters and onto them. When you decide in advance what deserves engagement, their tactics lose efficiency. You begin to evaluate interactions not by intensity, but by usefulness. If engaging doesn't change anything meaningful, you redirect. This isn't avoidance, it's conservation. Each time you reclaim attention, you reinforce autonomy. And as your focus stabilizes, the environments you tolerate start to shift too. Late-night messages, closed doors, vague conversations, and no record of what was said. Why do problems always grow there? Manipulation thrives in unstructured spaces where ambiguity can be rewritten. Structure changes that. Scheduled conversations, written agreements, neutral settings, and witnesses create external anchors. They reduce distortion without confrontation. When interactions live in light and record, gaslighting loses its footing. You're no longer relying on memory or emotion alone. Stability becomes shared, not negotiable. And once structure is in place, boundaries stop being theoretical and start requiring follow-through. Setting boundaries isn't what teaches people how to treat you. Consistency does. A boundary without follow-through becomes a suggestion. Calmly applied consequences turn limits into reality. This isn't punishment or threat. It's logistics. You decide in advance what action you'll take, then you take it without drama. Each repetition reinforces predictability, and predictability is unsettling to manipulative behavior, which depends on testing and adjustment. As your stability becomes reliable, their room to maneuver shrinks. That reliability also has an effect inward, especially on guilt. There's a quiet confidence that grows when your inner story stops arguing with your actions. After enforcing boundaries, guilt often appears. Not because you were wrong, but because old conditioning protests change. Writing down facts grounds you in reality. Values like respect, calm, and autonomy become reference points instead of emotions. Daily reinforcement retrains the inner reviewer that once equated calm with selfishness. Over time, internal consistency strengthens your external composure. And when that alignment settles in, something else begins to happen without effort. Your calm becomes predictable. What frustrates manipulative behavior most isn't resistance. It's boredom. Toxic dynamics run on drama, escalation, and emotional spikes. When you become predictably calm, that supply dries up. Your reactions no longer vary based on provocation. And without variation, there's nothing to map or exploit. Escalation stops working because it stops producing results. Over time, attempts intensify, then fade. Some people disengage entirely. Others quietly adjust. And as your presence stabilizes, you begin to notice that your calm isn't just affecting others. It's reshaping how you move through real situations. You feel the moment coming before it arrives. The tone shift, the familiar pressure. So, how do you stay steady there? Mental rehearsal answers that. Visualizing calm responses prepares your nervous system before the encounter ever happens. When the moment arrives, your body recognizes the pattern. Selective attention does the rest. You respond only to what matters and let minor provocations pass without engagement. This isn't indifference. It's precision. Energy is conserved for what preserves autonomy. And with enough repetition, these choices stop feeling deliberate and start feeling natural. There's a noticeable ease that develops when conflict no longer hijacks your system. Manipulative strategies fail repeatedly because they can't gain traction. As emotional supply disappears, influence fades. You begin to read situations more clearly, respond with patience, and recover faster after stress. Emotional intelligence grows without effort, because regulation is already in place. Calm becomes the default, not the exception. Relationships either stabilize or fall away. And as your inner state settles, you realize the change isn't just relational, it's architectural, shaping how your life is organized. Real power isn't about confronting every problem. It's about removing the conditions that keep them alive. You stop trying to change people and start changing structures, language, and responses. Emotional autonomy replaces reactivity. Interactions become intentional instead of urgent. Stability attracts respect without demanding it. Chaos loses its grip because it can't anchor anywhere. This calm isn't passive. It's designed, practiced, and maintained. And as it settles into habit, You reclaim not just your energy, but the ability to shape your life without interference. You weren't failing at conflict, you were outgrowing it in a way that didn't have language yet. Calm creates a rhythm that lets you move through tension without losing yourself. In that rhythm, clarity replaces urgency, and choice replaces reflex. If this connected with you, liking the video helps keep these conversations going. And in the next one, we'll explore some surprisingly weird traits that might reveal just how sharp your mind really is.